All these girls in the club, I got my eyes on you. All these girls in the club, I got my eyes on you.
Hey Jaden, how you doing?
Dude, excellent.
I heard you were looking to talk to someone in the tech world.
I was, I think. Are you the right person?
Absolutely, step in.
Alrighty.
How you doing? Get in.
Alrighty. I'm locked in. I'm excited for this.
Me too. What a coincidence seeing you here.
What a coincidence. I know. Who would have thought? Yeah. So, let's just start. How did Adrian Hall get to be Adrian Hall today?
Okay, well, let me start and then you can ask me some other questions as well. But my dad was an entrepreneur, so I saw him build his own business, and I guess that gave me a lot of motivation back in England to want to emulate him and be successful. So this was going back to, when I was like 10, 11 years old. And so I thought, well, what could get me started? And I thought, well, whatever you do in business, you need to be able to talk to customers.
Yes.
And so when I was in my teens, I was really keen to earn money. I guess I was into cars from a very young age, so I wanted to start saving. My parents weren't well off or anything, so I decided to get a job in a pub in England.
Okay.
Because I thought there's something that gives me exposure to lots of customers, kind of lots of transactions. I was probably going to end up meeting some angry customers, some drunk customers. And so when I was 17, which is the drinking age in England, I did get a job in a local pub. So that's kind of how I got started, which gave me a lot of customer experience still when I was in high school. And that was really helpful for me to figure out that, number one, I enjoyed the customer interaction, and number two, that they was challenging because there are so many different characters and personalities. So that was really how I got started, and I decided to use that kind of customer service as a foundation. I had no clue really what I wanted to do at your age, in high school, but I thought maybe sales might be something that's interesting.
Yeah, I like that. So you knew from a very young age that sort of personal interaction with people, that extroverted nature, you could say, is something that you wanted to pursue. Now my question is, how does your job today, or any job you've had in the past, how has that ability to interact with people and to be able to understand people, how has that helped you in those professions?
I think it helped me tremendously. I mean, in everything I do, it doesn't matter what job you have, whether you're in sales or marketing or finance, even growing to become a CEO, I highly recommend that everything you do, you become customer obsessed.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that will serve you well, whatever functional role you want to be in. And because if you take the customer's perspective, everything else kind of falls in line.
Yeah.
People that don't have a customer perspective really don't have the right context. We used to have a phrase that said, the customer is always right.
Yeah.
Even if they're not, you have to have that perspective. And we all have experience as a customer, whether we're buying a car or a video game or a washing machine. We all like to be sold to in a professional way, don't we?
Yeah.
And how do you think it makes you feel when you're not sold to well?
Not very good.
No. And are you likely to buy from that person or that company?
Not at all.
No. So it's not a good representation of the brand of that company. So for me, that was like a foundational element, and that served me really well in whatever role I choose. And I think there's an opportunity for everyone in high school to get that customer experience.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful foundational element to whatever you want to do.
I mean, honestly, that's why I started working at Better Buzz, is because first, obviously, I realized I need money, and then someone has to fund my Chipotle addiction.
Yep.
And then secondly, it's like a company is not necessarily, a corporate structure. A company is not a CEO, HR, and then employees. A company is getting people to come into your store and give you their money. So yeah, I mean, I like what you're saying about you have to give people a reason to give you their money, because that's what we're all doing. Basically, all jobs are just taking money from people and offering a service in return.
Yep.
But the main idea is that when I'm at Better Buzz, I'm very cognizant of my role in that experience, where I have to give the customer the best experience possible, so that the resistance for them forking over $10 for a drink, which is objectively ridiculous, can be as little as possible. So
I think that's absolutely right, and I think one thing that you've probably learned even after a few months at Better Buzz is you meet a multitude of different characters and personalities, and I think that's the other thing is understanding people. This is kind of like a fast track in customer service to understanding people. And if you understand people, the other key element is to be able to put yourselves in their shoes. And I always do that. Whatever job I've had, I always think, okay, what's the customer perspective? So for example, if I'm selling to a CEO of a company, you've got to understand the persona of that CEO, and then you've got to understand what are the metrics or how are they measured. So what's important to them? Is it for a CEO growing top line revenue, or is it profitability? Once you can start to ask probing questions and understand that, then you're much more likely to be able to sell to them and grow your business successfully. Even if it's a car wash business, it doesn't matter what it is. Then you'll be able to sell more successfully and make them a happy customer and have them come back to you.
Exactly. Yeah. I like that. Put yourself in other people's shoes, so that you can understand, what it is that'll help them fork over their money at the end of the day. That's super cool. So let's go back to so you started working in a pub in England. Did you go to university? And if so, where? And then what role do you feel like your education as a whole, not just university, but college as well, or high school as well, what role do you think that had in shaping your future career endeavors?
So that's a great question. So I did go to university in England. I chose business, so I got a degree in business and finance with kind of a minor in marketing.
Okay.
And again, the whole purpose of that is because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought, well, business again gives me a foundation to learn as much as I can, particularly because I kind of wanted to be an entrepreneur like my dad. And it gave me time to try and figure out what I enjoyed and what I didn't enjoy. And that's exactly what happened. And I think in America, you also have the benefit at university of, say, you do a 4-year degree. The first 2 years are kind of foundational subjects, and that gives you the opportunity to change your major if you want. So I wouldn't worry if you don't know what you want to do at this point, or even as a senior next year. It's not essential, and most people don't have too much of an idea of what they want to do. And university kind of buys you that time to figure it out. So it did play a fundamental role. For me, I think one of the most valuable things about university was not necessarily the academics, but it was the ability to do an internship. So it was kind of like following on from my work in a pub and getting back into, this time it was a larger company, and I had the choice to work back then in either Avis or Hertz or Hewlett-Packard as well was another one. And so I chose Hewlett-Packard, and I was not interested particularly in technology. But one thing that served me really well is you've got to figure out what type of work environment you want to work in. And for me, the two most fundamental things were I wanted to work in a fast-moving industry because I'm kind of like that. I want to keep learning and try new things. And the second thing is I wanted to work around really smart people. And so those were kind of my foundational elements. And so for me, working in technology, the technology industry, allowed me both of those things. It's a super fast-moving industry. Technology software is always moving along well. And honestly, I was not interested in computers at all. It was not something that appealed to me. And in fact, when that opportunity first came up at HP, it was like, nah.
So then what did appeal to you about Hewlett-Packard?
It was the fast-moving business and business environment, and it was I met super smart people. And it was like, wow, this is a very stimulating environment, and I'm going to learn more. And interestingly, a friend of mine in England who was studying law at the time got a job in a small solicitor's office, and it was all, hello, Mr. Jones, hello, Mr. Richards. It was very formal. It was undynamic, and he hated it. Not that someone else who was interested in law might not have loved it, but I guess what I'm showing you is that's the contrast. It's like finding a highly dynamic, stimulating environment versus something maybe a bit more traditional. I was also offered a job in a traditional manufacturing company, which would have been very similar to that.
So that dynamic nature of Hewlett-Packard, well, I guess that's something that, I guess the dynamic businesses of that year were Hewlett-Packard and things like that. But today, nowadays, it would be things like Microsoft and AI, where, and I know that you lead AWS. So would you be able to talk to us a little bit about what you do currently? So what is AWS, and what is your role
tell you a little about how I got there. So I did end up, when I graduated, I went back into HP. I got offered, they paid for my last couple of years of my studies at college with no commitment to join, but I did end up going back, and I went back on the graduate scheme, which I would highly recommend if you can get into a bigger company. It allowed me to go around each department for a certain number of weeks, like manufacturing, research and development, marketing, sales, and then you can kind of hop into one of those roles. So, but I always wanted to be a CEO of a tech company, but I learned everything I learned from a large company, and so that allowed me to kind of build my skills broadly before I jumped into technology, and I got a transfer out to the US with HP. I wanted to go to Silicon Valley because it's like the
place to be,
yeah, exactly, the core of technology. And as soon as I got my green card, I jumped into a high-risk technology company, small startup, very dynamic environment, and I did, over 19 years, I did 5 startups. I was CEO 3 times. I had an exit to a company called Citrix, and an exit to a company called to private equity, which is like a different form of financial company. But along the way, because I was CEO a few times, I obviously made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
And so AWS, Amazon Web Services, asked me to come and help build a strategic relationship with the biggest venture capital company in the world called Sequoia Capital, and help their CEOs build their businesses and help them try and avoid making some of the mistakes that I did.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a super cool job because I'm meeting some of the smartest tech entrepreneurs in the world and kind of advising them on how to grow their businesses.
That's pretty interesting. Well,
so that's why I end up where I am.
Yeah, I mean, well, so I like what you touched on with you starting multiple companies. You started 5 companies, you were CEO of 3 of them. What are characteristics of successful people who start companies? So when you see, when you start these 5 companies, and there are obviously multiple people in each company, what did successful people in those companies look like?
That's a great question. So I think, there are certain traits or characteristics you look for, and I think one of the first things is resilience. It's one thing to be successful, but you're only going to be successful by making mistakes. And the way I look at someone is, it's how they get up when they've been knocked down. We all make mistakes, whether we join the wrong company or whether we go into the wrong function, like going into marketing, but I really think I should be in the technology side, or I should be in the legal side, or the human resources side. So you can make mistakes there. It's how you kind of recover from those mistakes. And as a CEO, you're going to make a lot of mistakes as well, because you take risks, you make business decisions, and you're not always going to be successful. So I think the first thing is it's resilience. It's how does someone get up? The second thing I think is determination and ambition. Because if you hire someone, particularly in a startup company where it's not really a huge opportunity to learn, you kind of have to execute.
Yeah.
Because timing is everything with a small startup. Because you're going up against big companies. As a tiny technology company, you're going up against Cisco and Nokia or some of these other companies. So it's that ability to be successful and be determined, and I think it's someone who just has huge ambition to succeed despite all obstacles. And the willingness to learn and be humble as well. So those would be, I think, some of the key characteristics. And I think the last thing that has to be a characteristic of anyone in a successful company is their ability to execute. So you can plan and you can strategize all you want, but at the end of the day, you've got to pick a strategy. It's a little bit like as a pilot, you build your flight plan, and you could spend 2 days building a flight plan. As soon as the wheels leave the ground, the wind's changed. So suddenly the plane is being blown off course, so you've got to change course. Same as a sailor, you build your chart, off you go, the wind changes, and you have to tack. Same in a startup company or in any company or in any organization you're building, things change. So, the macroeconomic climate changes, the competitive landscape changes. So you have to be ready to make a decision and execute rather than sit still and what we sometimes call analysis paralysis. So where you keep analyzing, well, let's just get one more piece of data on that competitor, and you're not moving the business forward.
Exactly.
So that's really key.
Okay, so you said that you were part of 5 startup companies. Obviously you're not with those startup companies today, you were with AWS. What ended up happening? I guess, you can pick one of those companies at random. I guess, how did it start? What ended up happening to it? And then what either went wrong or went really well? What were some of those things?
So I'll pick one where I was asked to come in because the company was number 3 in the marketplace.
Okay.
And it was underperforming.
Okay.
And they had, it was a company based in Norway, in Oslo, and it was, the founder of the company was an extremely smart professor from the UK, actually. This is when I was living in California. And he was a fantastic founder, but he wasn't a CEO. And he kept changing his mind, and he couldn't be clear on his strategy. So they asked me to come in and take the company over, and I did that, and saw that the people he had hired were just wrong. So pretty much all the VPs in the company were just not the right people to allow us to execute. So I had to get rid of almost all of those people, and I rehired the VPs actually in Silicon Valley, not in Oslo. And we left the technology development center in Oslo with that VP, with the chief technology officer who was the founder. And so that allowed us to correct course and put people in place who would build processes to allow us to scale the company, both in finance and, for example, product management. Someone who was very experienced from a big company called VMware, who came in and kind of owned the product roadmap. So he would go out and talk to customers, and Mr. and Mrs. Customer, what is good, what is bad about this product, how can we make it better, what would make you pay more money for the product. That wasn't happening in the company before I hired him. That made a huge difference to the trajectory of the company. And we were selling to big banks like JP Morgan Chase, and they were pretty cross because before I kind of refreshed the management team, the company wasn't listening to customers, which goes right back to my pub example.
Exactly.
It's like, you've got to listen to your customer. And sure enough, we turned the company around and ended up selling it back to a private equity company.
So what I took from that story is that it was really mostly about finding the right people to help the company succeed. How do you find good people? If I'm the CEO of a company and I have all the power, how do I find the right people for the right roles?
If it's in a startup technology company, a relatively young company, there is no algorithm for lack of experience. So finding people who are experienced that you can trust is absolutely critical, because you don't have time to bring someone in to train them up, to see if they can perform, to be micromanaging them, to help them learn. You have to pick people who are experienced that you can trust.
So with that experience is basically, self-sufficiency is one of the...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think, experience can come in many forms. It's like the chief financial officer that I brought in had already built 4 companies and had been through the acquisition process with 2 of those. So I knew I could trust him if we got to the point where we were going to have the company acquired, we were going to sell the company. I could completely trust in him because he'd done it before. And he knew how to manage expenses. He knew what it would mean when I told him we want to become profitable, even though if we're not growing our market share enough. He just knew, and he would build a financial plan around the goals of the company. So I think really having trusted experience is absolutely critical. And the other thing is actually carefully bringing in people who will be compatible with each other, like the chief revenue officer and the chief marketing officer. You bring in a certain personality type and people with experience who will allow you to know and trust that they're going to work well together because they have similar experience in their own particular functions. So that's really critical.
So experience and then having people be compatible, right?
Yeah.
Because the company at the end of the day, it's not just one person, it's like a living organism. It's like, they say a beehive, a bee colony, is basically just one super organism. It's not just one bee, it's all the bees. So in that
there, and you can have an average technology and an exceptional team, and they're more likely to succeed than an amazing technology that's hugely differentiated with a B class or a C class team. So you're absolutely right. It's all about the team, particularly in an earlier stage company.
Interesting. I heard a quote the other day, and it was like, you don't want to find a person for a job, you want to find a job for a person, right? So when you have people and you know people in life, you want to find those competent people, things to do to help the company. So I guess that's
Good quote.
That's what I'm looking forward to for college and universities, because is the ability to meet new people, the ability to meet people who I know can help me, help me grow whatever company I end up growing, help me, do whatever. So
yeah, and I think the thing that you need to look for most is honestly what's going to make you happy, or what's enjoyable. We can all map out our financial goals in a spreadsheet, but if you don't have a passion for what you're doing, it's very unlikely you're going to excel. And so I think it's as you're going through high school and into college, it's exploring the different functions, the different subjects that you get exposed to, and even the different personalities and nationalities is also very important in this this global economic world.
yeah, exactly.
So find something, keep looking for something that will allow you to grow and not stifle your interest if it's a very slow-moving company, for example, and allow you to keep exploring to make sure you find something that you're passionate about.
Interesting. All right. Well, what advice would you have to me for what actionable advice would you have for me today in high school? Because obviously, I spend from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock at school. I'm not in a business per se, and in any meaningful capacity at Better Buzz. But what actual advice could I take right now to help me learn some of the things that you had to learn, right? Because you said, a lot of the reason why you got hired at AWS is because you had been through 5 companies, you knew the mistakes. So what are some things that I could do to maybe learn some of those lessons, ideally ahead of time, so I don't have to make the mistakes myself?
I think you're on a great path right now. I think, you're exactly the age I was. When I had my first job, I was super ambitious and hungry, and I think the thing that you're doing is getting exposure to customers. You might want to look for some kind of internship over the next few years to give you exposure to, let's just say you're interested in, I think you mentioned at the beginning you were quite interested in finance.
Yeah.
So, finance means many different things to different people. It could be the chief financial officer or working in a financial department of a small technology company, just because we used that example earlier. Yeah. Or it could be working on Wall Street. So, if numbers interest you, then think about, well, what is it about finance that interests me? Because you could work in a finance department of an old-style manufacturing company or a solicitor's office, like I mentioned earlier on. And you're doing the monthly accounts, and there's not much else.
Yeah.
Or there aren't many customers, and so you're not billing that much. And so it's kind of everything can be done on an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Or you work in a very dynamic environment, with a bigger finance department where you have the opportunity to move around. And so start to explore in your mind what finance means to you, if indeed finance, is something of interest to you. But I think I've given coaching to a lot of people in their careers who've got stuck, not the age that you are now, but they've got to maybe their late 20s or early 30s, and they typically haven't been in any sort of customer-facing or sales environment. And at that point, they kind of hit a glass ceiling because they don't necessarily understand. I'm going right back to where I started. They don't understand the customer. And what I'll say to them is, you need to kind of eat humble pie for a bit and go out and carry a bag and feel what it's like to sell something or be with customers. Get into customer service. The earlier you do that in your career, the better it will serve you, even if you think, oh, there's no way I'm a salesperson.
Yeah.
I'm very uncomfortable with that. You don't have to be a salesperson to carry a bag, but in larger companies, there might be some sales support function, or there might be some customer service, or telesales, or whatever it is. But even if it were only for 6 months, try it so you can talk about it in an interview, and you can genuinely, in your mind, go back to the personas of those customers that the company is serving. So you're doing exactly the right thing at Better Buzz right now. Just be extra observant as to what people's persona's like. You know, when someone walks to the front of the queue, you'll have a preconception as to what they're like.
Exactly. Well, so like I'll give you an example today. So there's a family and there's an elderly Asian woman who's paying for it all.
Yeah.
And typically we're supposed to get the order, and then we're supposed to tell them how much it is, and we're supposed to ask them if they're part of our loyalty program,
Yeah.
which is on an app, on a phone, you have to scan it. And I thought to myself, I'm like, what sense would it make for me to badger this old lady on pulling out her phone and scanning an app? Like, there's no chance she's gonna. So in that situation, you omit that. You don't actually ask them for the app, even though you're not technically supposed to. But and then conversely, you know, if you see like an 18-year-old, you know, walk in, probably pretty technologically savvy.
Yeah.
And you know, if you see them walk in a lot, you might say, hey, join our rewards program. You can, you know, get free coffee on us every once in a while. So I like what you said.
Yeah, that's a great example. I'll give you another one that probably was the most significant impact on me event that ever happened. So in Europe, you typically take a gap year between high school and university. So you travel, you know, you work, you do whatever you want, but you kind of grow as an individual before you go off to university. And so I got a job in a Mercedes-Benz dealership. I got very lucky. So it was a sales job. And I was kind of the youngest person they'd ever hired, and so all of the other salespeople had a lot of experience. And this older guy walked onto the dealership forecourt to look at this. I always remember it was a blue Mercedes sedan, and he had a brown paper bag, and he looked extremely scruffy. Not quite homeless, but he looked definitely of an archetype that you would think there is no way that person is ever going to buy a car, let alone a Mercedes.
Yeah.
And so all the other salespeople didn't leave their offices. And I thought, hey, you know, I'm young. He's looking at that car. I'll go out and talk to him.
Yeah.
So I went out and talked to him. And I told him a bit more about the car. It was a used car. It was still, you know, quite an expensive car, but a middle of the range Mercedes. And we got into this quite interesting discussion, and I realized he knew quite a lot about it, which kind of surprised me. And he then said to me, I would like to buy this car. I said, okay, sir. I was very polite, thinking,
what the heck, yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
just like your lady today in Benabus. And I think the price was something like £18,000, say $25,000, something like that. And he said, I have cash in this bag. And I thought he was joking.
Okay.
It was like a Safeway bag. And he opened it, and sure enough, it was cash. And so I was a little cheeky. I had the other salespeople who had ignored him count the cash while I talked to the man. And he bought the car cash. That to me was the biggest lesson of always expect the unexpected and never perceive someone in a certain way before you go and qualify them. So qualify is a really important word.
Yeah.
I'm going to go and qualify. Is this person who they think they are, they look like, or are they completely different?
Or
And
they
I
really, yeah.
always remembered that lesson. It's like never have a preconceived idea until you've gone and talked to them.
Yeah. Interesting. That sounds like a big win for Adrian, honestly, in his career. What is, if you're comfortable sharing, what has been one of your biggest losses or failures, but what have you also taken away from that lesson-wise?
That's a good question. One of the biggest losses was at that company that I told you about in Norway, and it was a huge deal. We were trying to win at JP Morgan Chase, and we were kind of the incumbent supplier there, so we already had a lot of fans in there. They were using our product, and another competitor came along and tried to buy the business and came in way less expensive. They kind of were trying to buy the business. It wasn't profitable, and we decided to push back, and the customer didn't go with us. It was a big loss for our company. So I think the lesson for me there was, however comfortable you are with a relationship between your company and a customer, never ever take it for granted, and always be super hungry to make sure you win.
Don't count your chiclets till they hatch, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Very important.
Don't be happy until the money's in the bank, basically.
Yep.
Right?
Get the signature on the page.
Get the signature on the page.
Don't ever celebrate until you do that.
I like that. Alrighty. Well, I think we're almost done with this, but I would like to ask, we just talked about the biggest loss. What has been the biggest win for you in your career? Maybe it's maybe something little that helped catapult the rest of your career, or maybe something huge. Maybe it's something obvious. What do you think is really cool?
It was actually when I was in sales at HP in the UK, and I won an enormous deal. It was the biggest one we'd ever won in Europe, actually, when I was like 23 years old, fresh out of college. And so I was suddenly responsible for salespeople in 46 different countries, and it opened my mind to the importance of international business.
Yeah.
And suddenly I was able to go to each of these countries and meet the salespeople, and I think it taught me the importance of growing the international aspect of your resume. And that's something else I would encourage very strongly, is like, it's much more of a global world now than it was back then.
Especially like us Americans, we're so
Yes.
geocentric.
Yes.
We're stuck in our own ways. Yeah.
Exactly, but if you want to differentiate yourself on your resume and your career, I would highly encourage you to have an international lens and try and get into a position where you're exposed in some way. Doesn't matter if you go into a job in finance or an internship in finance or in marketing or whatever else. Try and position yourself to learn about the international aspects of the job, which is another huge area of interest, because then you start to think about, okay, what about the cultures of different countries?
Yeah.
What about the personalities you meet, the business practices, and how it's different? Like in Japan, you typically do a deal in the limo on the way back to the airport, even if you've been with a customer for 3 days. So very, very different way of working. And so if you have an opportunity to study abroad, I know at PRS you're very lucky to go,
travel abroad.
Yeah, exactly. And you'll have the same if you go to university, the one that you like. Then look for that, because it can differentiate you greatly, as you say, particularly in the US, where perhaps people don't always think about that.
Yeah, exactly. Alrighty, well, the elephant in the room. We talked about all this business, all the hard, arduous discussion is over with. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. This car. Why McLaren? Educate the listeners and the viewers a little bit about it.
It's the most technologically advanced, one of the most technologically advanced cars on the road, because a lot of the technology in this car is from Formula One.
Interesting.
I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of nice cars. Having really been very ambitious for that in my life. But the level of sophistication in this car is beyond anything I've ever experienced before. And so I think I do have a fascination with technology and how it finds its way down from racing series like Formula One for everyday use in cars that are on the road. And I happen to love performance cars. And so it's an absolute pleasure to find something that's so beautifully designed as well as so technologically advanced, and happens to be British as well. So
well, F1,
bit of loyalty there.
Yeah, well, F1's like one of the most technologically advanced sports in the world, right? Because like every race, you have to change your car so that it can keep up with it.
Exactly, and I mean, there's hybrid technology that's made its way down from Formula One technology, tires.
Yeah.
So we're hoping that the world becomes a more efficient place, because we're leveraging technology from a very advanced race series.
Alrighty, I appreciate this very much.
Great to bump into you.
Great to bump into you. What a coincidence.
Thanks, Jason.